Hello crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I'm here with another 6x6 paper pad tutorial. Today I'll be using the Authentique hunting paper pad. I picked this up because it struck me as kind of unique, great for masculine cards. I don't believe any, one theme is for any one gender or anything like that, but I could see that these would be a less popular theme. If I just look at all the papers that are available out there, there's plenty of florals. And this is like the first time in a while I've seen anything for hunting, specifically that I thought would work well for card making. A lot of times they're a little bit more geared towards scrapbookers, which makes sense, as it is, an activity that families engage in and therefore might be creating scrapbook pages about. I am not going to add any sentiments to my cards today because I wasn't quite sure at the time, and still not, where I'm going to donate all of these. I do think Cards for Soldiers would be a great organization, but I also think that some children would really like these cards as well. Like I'm thinking particularly older kids. I know a lot of kids who where hunting is a pastime for their family, so it would be appealing to them, for instance. This paper pad is kind of limited. There's not a lot of designs. There's in fact 4 different papers, but they're double-sided, so 8 designs. And that made me hesitate to do my sort of traditional 6x6 paper pad tutorial where I just kind of create a bunch of designs, because there was 5 of each paper. And in my traditional way of doing things, if there is, if I create one design with a sheet, I usually do it for every sheet that is in that same pattern. And since there's 5 of each sheet, I just felt like I wouldn't get a lot of variation. So I decided to mix it up and try something different. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to use my own one sheet wonder tutorial or templates, and I'm going to create every card today with those except for the cut apart scraps that I'm left with. I wanted to do this in part because I wanted to see how the one sheet wonder sketches worked with cut aparts and if it would be good for really using up a whole 6x6 paper pad. I created a new One Sheet Wonder template for this video. So there will be 10 templates in all, and this is number 10. This is the first time I'm sharing it, but I probably will do a separate video with it as well, just in case people weren't interested in the whole tutorial but still want to see the new template. I keep all of my templates in a sketchbook, or a book of sketches, in a binder here. You can go to my website, which will be linked, and you will see all of today's cards in a blog post, and you can get all of these One Sheet Wonder templates. You can download them as PDFs, or you can just save the pictures or save them to a Pinterest board. I tried to make it as versatile and easy to use as possible. I saved them all in a document and printed it out and laminated them. So these are just the sketches, not the templates. And this allows me to cut the papers, then place all the cut papers that match a particular sketch with the sketch in a plastic bag. You can use a variety of bags for this. You can reuse packaging. You can use standard Ziploc bags. They work well for an A2 size card, which my sketches are, so that's why I'm referencing it. But I tend to use the really thick 5x8 bags that I put my stamps in, just because, again, being so thick, I can use them many times and I don't have to worry about them ripping. So I find that appealing, whereas with that, when I'm working with like a sort of standard Ziploc, sometimes they'll rip after a few uses, and I just kind of have these on hand. I will say, when I store my 6x6 paper pads, I do store them in standard Ziplocs, the quart size, but I choose the freezer bags because those are a little bit sturdier. You probably could get similar bags to what I have for my stamps for 6x6 papers, but the quart size works well and they're readily available. All right, so back to the process. What I'm doing is, off to the side, I have my binder open, and I start at sketch 1 and take the first piece of paper out of the pad. And I'm not really thinking about what piece of paper it is because they're all double-sided, they're all pretty standard, and I'm cutting all of the pieces according to my template. My template allows you to get 2 cards from each 6x6 piece of paper with no scraps, but they also require you, or they suggest that you mat everything. So in the sketch, you'll see the pattern paper cut as according to the template, but then you'll see everything has a mat. Most of the time it's a 1/4 inch mat, but not always. This means that I will also have to cut a bunch of cardstock. However, there will be scraps of cardstock left. This doesn't bother me. I always have reasons to use scraps of cardstock. I'll probably use the scraps to create the sentiments when I decide what kind of cards I want these to be. I do try to tailor my cards to the organization. Like some organizations don't need birthday cards. So if I made a bunch of birthday cards, it would limit where I could donate them to. Other organizations do need a lot of birthday cards. And so if I decide to send them there, etc. In terms of donating, there is always in my video description a link to the page on my website that shares all kinds of organizations that you can donate to. And it says there shares printable jokes so that if you don't know what to write inside your cards, but you want to donate, because a lot of places do ask for you to write something inside the cards that you donate, you can use those jokes as a kind of jumping off point or as the main part of your message, and then maybe add a little bit of personalization. And usually they ask you to sign your name and where you're from. I found that the process of cutting all of these to the templates felt a little less creative, to be honest, because I had already designed all of these in the past and I'd spent a lot of time with them, because when I designed them, I made a test card and then I made a card for the video, and usually it was several cards because, like I said, each template makes 2, and sometimes I would make multiple so I could combine pattern papers, etc. And I had designed all of these fairly recently. So I could understand that this process of sort of following directions the whole time might not be for everyone. But then I imagine that there are other people who occasionally are just looking to make a bunch of cards. And maybe it's because they have a specific occasion they need cards for. Maybe a family member has asked them, hey, I really could use a set of birthday cards. And I was in particular, somebody in the video, in the comments had mentioned that they had intended to use some of the One Sheet Wonders to make sets of cards to give to family members for Christmas. And I thought this was a great idea. I think that there's plenty of us who are on a little bit tighter of a budget this year. So being able to hand make some gifts would be great. And I imagine that most recipients, if you're going to make high quality cards, it's going to save them the time of having to go purchase a card. It's going to save them the money of having to purchase a card. And so I think most people would appreciate it. I definitely recommend high quality cardstock for the card bases and high quality envelopes to go with it. So there's a little bit of money up front, but a lot of it you're going to have on hand. I took all of the sentiments and they are 2 by 1.5. So I measured all of that off on my paper trimmer here. It was really convenient, and I like that they actually all had a little border around it. Sometimes when I'm working with cut-aparts, they're all different sizes, and so you have to be a little bit more careful as you cut things, and the edges touch each other. So if you don't cut precisely on the line dividing them, you have to do a little extra trimming. These cut-aparts were really easy to work with. Separately off camera, because I don't want this video to be forever and a day, and if I wasn't clear before, you don't need to know any of the measurements of everything I'm cutting because all the templates are over on my blog. You'll go to the blog link in the video description and you'll see a picture of the card, how many I made of it, because most of them I made 2, half of them I made 2 and half of them I made 4 because there were 15 sheets of paper and 10 templates. So I was able to just, like I said, follow all those directions, and you'll get them because it'll be, here's the card that I made and here's the sketch that goes with it. So I hope that is more helpful to you than me saying, okay, now I'm trimming this to this size and this to this size. I mean, especially because I'm making so many cuts for each card. I just feel like this video would take forever and it would be super confusing and boring, to be honest. I liked that this particular paper pad was double-sided for this project because it meant that even though I cut on just one sheet, I could get 2 patterns on one card. I've mentioned this in the past, but if you need to use up pattern paper that is single-sided, cutting one piece gets you 2 cards. Well, if you cut 2 pieces of paper, you can mix up the patterns, you'll just get 4 cards, which most of the time we're fine with getting extra cards. So that would be my recommendation. As I go, I decide for each card whether or not I want, like which pattern I want to be the main focal image. And when I'm creating some of them, like this card here, because I have the paper and then a cardstock layer, when I layer this large piece on top of those 2 strips, it can get a little like lumpy because so much of that large panel would be taped directly to the card and then so much of it would be taped to those 2 strips. Trying to even it out a bit by taking one of those pieces of scrap cardstock I mentioned and placing it under there, like placing it under that blank area of card base, allows it to sit more evenly across. So I hope that description made sense. It's not a big deal if you don't want to do it, but if you feel like with the layers of cardstock, things can get a little bit lumpy, smoothing it out by adding those scraps of cardstock under some of the layers can be helpful. As I go, I mentioned I'm going to pick which pattern I'd like to use. And what's nice is I can decide that each card's a little bit different. So maybe, like for instance, on this one, there's 2 background panels and then 1 main panel that sits over them. So for one card, I could say the paw prints are going to be the main panel. And for the other card, I could say that the camouflage is going to be the main panel. I have some versatility there because of making 2 of each. I would definitely recommend, and I always say this in my 6x6 paper pad tutorials, I really recommend double-sided paper. I'm almost always happier to have the option to choose between 2 sides. It can sometimes be a little bit pricier and it's maybe not as readily available if you purchase in stores, like some of the big box stores have single-sided paper more regularly. But I think that rather than get one of those super large pads, maybe get the smaller pad that's the same price but gives you more versatility. You might have more fun working with it. A lot of my sketches, well, all of them have an orientation. Like this one is as a vertical or portrait orientation in the sketch. But of course, you could flip them to be portrait. And I did that a couple of times throughout this video where I felt like turning a portrait landscape or a landscape portrait still worked out well. It doesn't work for all of them for sure, but I like that there's versatility in that. And, because I'm designing these as a card maker, I'm keeping that in mind. Another thing that was nice, so here's where you see I mixed up each pattern. Another thing that I liked about this particular pad of paper was most of the patterns did not have a clear directionality. They could go portrait or landscape, they could be cut in any way and it wouldn't particularly matter. And the ones that did, there was like a deer paper where because it was the head of a deer, it was, there was obvious up and down. I was able to then just be a little bit more selective because I cut it without really thinking about it, which was, my mistake, of course. If you have a paper where the directionality matters more, you should, definitely take a pause and consider that. There are some of my one sheet wonders where directionality doesn't matter, that if your paper faces either direction, the way that the directions tell you to cut the paper, you could work with it either way. There are a few where directionality matters a bit more, like the particular sketch that I'm working on right now. It doesn't really work portrait or landscape. It kind of only works as a landscape card. So if you were to cut your paper such that it was more in that other orientation, it would be a problem. But because it's double-sided, so here I do have the deer paper. It's that darker paper with the dots on the back. And at first I didn't even realize that there was a directionality to it, which was also part of my problem. I could choose, like, if the way that I had to glue it down would make the deer face the wrong direction, well, I had the other side of the paper. And it may not be my preference, and maybe I would have wished that I paid attention and could use the deer side, but having that versatility of the double-sided paper helps. And that's why I'm recommending that you stick with double-sided paper when you can and think about it. And also to consider when you're purchasing pattern paper, sometimes it's difficult to tell what all the patterns are going to be depending on the online shop and how much they give you. And that's why I also think it can be nice to check out videos. Like if you're like, I really think I might want to buy this Doodlebug paper pad, let me go watch a video where someone uses it, because then you do get to see them all, which can be nice. But think about that ahead of time. Like if most of the papers, and it happens a lot with Doodlebug, if they have a directionality, it could get frustrating. Okay, I go through a ton of ATG tape, as you can imagine, and some people say that they find the ATG really difficult to work with. I just kind of don't, because I think it's when I'm used to it. I used to find it really finicky. I used to take forever to load it. And here you can see that I could just do it. I mean, this video sped up quite a bit, but, or a little bit. And I can do it really easily now just because I've gotten used to it. And there are arrows on there that explain it, but there's also videos out there that are dedicated to just how to load your ATG. But I load my ATG with new tape probably at least once a week. I know that sounds a little bit crazy, but that's because I make a lot of cards. And I probably am too generous with adhesive, but I think that overall it's a pretty darn good value, the amount of tape that you get for the price. I do tend to order it from Tape Jungle because you can get a large amount. I don't always share that link just because I know there's plenty of people who don't need to buy 12 rolls of tape at once because, they don't go through tape like I do. But there's a couple of bulk sources out there. And so I'll try to remember to link to Tape Jungle in case you find, like me, that you would rather not have to purchase 2 rolls at a time, which is sort of the traditional package size for the ATG rolls. Okay, this is where I'm doing my new one sheet wonder. In some ways, I feel like I'm kind of running out of ideas for one sheet wonders, and then it'll a new one will just come to me really with clarity, and I'll I hope that they're still interesting to you guys, and I probably will slow down on them quite a bit because I shared a lot right in a row, but it has been a fun challenge to think about the geometry of how the paper can be cut apart and reassembled into this really restricted format in some ways. And I know a lot of people have said, I think these are really cool, but I have 12 by 12 paper. Well, part of my thought was the reason I did them in 6 by 6 is because your 12 by 12 paper could be cut into 4 pieces of 6 by 6 paper. And therefore, most of these sketches would work well for that too. However, I do recognize that some of the patterns are quite large on 12 by 12. So for instance, this new one requires these 3 3/4 inch by 1/2 inch strips that are then matted. And that much of a large pattern might look kind of funny. And so some of them probably are going to be a bit more well suited for 6 by 6 paper because that's what I'm used to and that's what I have most of. But I will be sharing some more 12 by 12. Sorry that it's taking me a long time to get to that. I gotta be honest, the 12 by 12 paper, I shared it recently in a haul. It's intimidating me. And I think that's the same issue that a lot of people have where it's okay, when I make the cut, I'm committed and I've used up a lot of paper. But I liked that new 6 by 6 template, the sketch number 10, because it allowed for some fun possibilities of making each of those stripes. If you weren't using it as a whole use up a 6 by 6 paper pad or piece of paper, because I know some people aren't, they have scraps already pre-cut. I think it could be fun to make each one of those background stripes a different random scrap that you had on hand. And yeah, so I think that one would be fun to play with, and I could see using it more for the really tiny pieces of paper that we sometimes get stuck with. I was thinking in particular when you take a 6 by 6 piece of paper and you cut it down to 4 by 5 1/4, you're left with a lot of those small strips. Here's another example of where I'm adding a little bit of cardstock. So here, that big square, some of it's gonna sit right on the card base and some of it's gonna sit on the strip. So that big piece that's gonna sit on the card base, I popped it up just a tiny bit by putting a piece of cardstock under it, and therefore it's more flush. There were a bunch of the cut-aparts that had these sayings on them, but none of them struck me as a particularly relevant card saying. Like, it says never take your eye off the target. I'm not sure why I would send someone a card that said that, except for like, well, maybe it's a sort of congratulations, but that's a pretty specialized sort of thing, and not all the organizations I donate to would need that. So while maybe they're good for a scrapbooking page, not so much for me. So I took those cut-aparts and I taped them such that the background, which was a sort of plaid, was showing, and then I took the rest of the cut-aparts that just had images and I taped them with a 1/4-inch mat, as you know, with the image showing. I did a 1/4-inch mat for all of them, even though one of my sketches has 1/8-inch mats instead. You could, of course, cut it down if you prefer, so that there's like one of the sketches has 6 squares in the background, and if you wanted the mat to be smaller, you could trim it after you decide which one to go with. There are 5 of each cut apart because there was 5 of each sheet. However, as I mentioned before, I did 4 of most cards, 4 of half the cards and 2 of the other half the cards, and therefore I'm never going to use all 5 cut aparts on one design. But when I pick a cut apart that I think goes well with a design, I'm going to just kind of grab the whole chunk of them that I need. So I'll grab 2 or 4 depending on how many I need. I took all of the cut aparts and I stacked them on my desk, and then I just went through the cards from 1 to 10, from sketch 1 all the way to sketch 10, picking out which one I thought worked best and not stressing too much about it. Now, I did find it a bit challenging that all of the cut aparts except one were in a portrait orientation. So that might be something that you want to keep in mind. However, I did manage to make it work, even though that sometimes I think I would have preferred a vertical orientation to my cut apart, I made the portrait orientation work. And the biggest thing that I considered that kind of helped me make these design choices of which cut apart to go where was that I thought about which way the animal or person in the picture was facing. So there are a couple of different ones with ducks or other fowl, and some of them were facing towards the left, and therefore I would want to put them on the right of my card so that because what happens generally with design is, if you see something that's looking one way, like a character or a person or an animal, you're going to look the way that character does. So you're going to first be drawn to the person or animal, and then your eye's going to be drawn to whatever way they're facing. So here, I would want to make sure that, that card, I wanted to make sure that the critters were going to face the same direction that I wanted, the rest of the card was going to be. Now, if you're going to put the image right smack dab in the center of the card, then it doesn't particularly matter. It can face either way. However, that's just sort of a general idea of what helps me to make that decision. Now, I've gone through cards 1 through 10, and I've picked a cut apart for each of them. There were 15 additional sheets of paper, so I made 30 cards, and the cut aparts, there were more than 30 of those cut aparts. So I'm left with a lot of cut aparts. And now I need to decide what to do. As mentioned before, all the ones with sayings, I took them and I taped them the saying so that it was facing the cardstock, and I'm left with this sort of plaid instead. I matched up each one of those plain plaid pieces with a cut apart and found that it worked out exactly such that for every cut apart that was left, I also had a word cut apart left, which felt very serendipitous and helped me to kind of decide what I would do. I think you could do a lot of things with these. I think that you could put more than one cut apart on some of the designs. I think you could get some additional paper from your stash if you wanted to. But I just wanted to show like how I would use these up. I also think you could glue these inside of the cards if you wanted, as just a little extra touch there. But because the size of these cut aparts worked out such that laying down 4 of them, 2 with images and 2 with the plain paper, filled up a card in a pleasing way, that's how I chose to do it. I generally chose that the animal in the top left, or the person in the top left, would be facing the person or animal in the top right. So if one was facing to the left, the other one was facing to the right, and it just kind of helped to draw their eye, towards each other rather than off the card. I did tape a few of them wrong, but that was generally my design process for how I picked it, and that allowed me to create a handful of additional cards. So that is it for my card video today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're interested in more crafting tutorials, be sure to subscribe to my channel. In the video description, I will leave you a blog link so that you can see the still pictures and get the measurements and sketches and all the information you need. The video description will also have all of the products that I used and mentioned today, as well as some of my social media links so you can follow me on Instagram, etc. And I'll leave you some additional videos to check out here at the end. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate all of your time.